As I understand it, the company's own modeling set a route for the pipeline that would have crossed the Missouri River somewhat north of the city of Bismarck, the state capital of North Dakota. My name is Jim Grijalva. I'm a professor of law at the University of North Dakota School of Law. I direct the Tribal Environmental Law Project, whose mission is to address environmental injustice, essentially disproportionate environmental impacts on indigenous peoples, both in the United States and around the world. I've been teaching for 25 years now. Before that was a private lawyer and represented Indian tribes in protecting their environments from pollution and sometimes assisting them in doing natural resource projects for economic development for the tribal community. There was political concern expressed by the citizens of Bismarck when they saw that route proposal, and my understanding was part of the political concern that was raised by citizens and residents of Bismarck about the contamination risk to their interests led Energy Transfer Partners to reroute or to propose a relocation of the pipeline downstream of the city of Bismarck so that the residents wouldn't be affected. The pipeline moved downstream of Bismarck, but just upstream of the reservation of Standing Rock people. When Standing Rock citizens said, "What about a catastrophic oil spill?" the answer seemed to depend on where you stood. If you were in Bismarck and you were concerned about the pipeline north of the city, the concern that there might be a spill that contaminates my drinking water system leads Energy Transfer Partners to put the pipeline downstream of the city. Then when the folks downstream of that new pipeline route, Standing Rock tribes said, "What about a catastrophic oil spill?" the answer was there won't be any, because we have state-of-the-art systems, we have leak detection, we have models that show that this won't happen. Environmental justice is supposed to not put a disproportionate risk on communities of color and low-income communities. The analysis done by Energy Transfer Partners, which was adopted by the Corps of Engineers, focused on the county just north of the reservation, which is a highly rural county and occupied by only a few individuals, almost all of whom are white. And the assumption of the analysis was if there was a spill of the pipeline, it would be at that place in that county and would therefore affect mostly white people and not minorities or American Indians. In fact, that analysis even went so far as to refer to Bismarck, which as a major metropolitan city has more diversity than rural counties in North Dakota. And it said, oh, if we had put the pipeline north of Bismarck, it would actually affect more minorities than where we're putting it, because the county where we're putting it now is almost all white. The problem, and what was outrageous in my estimation, was that there was no mention of the Standing Rock Reservation only yards downstream of that pipeline crossing. So it was as if there was an invisible wall that would stop all oil spilled from going downstream and affecting the Standing Rock people. So part of the document file, the case file, if you will, the administrative record of this decision should have included, and did include, this environmental justice so-called analysis. But that document was kept out of the public eye so that no one could see it and comment on it. And I have no idea who made that decision or why the decision was made, but when you look at the substance or the lack of substance in that so-called analysis, it's not unreasonable to suspect that the reason it wasn't made public was because at the time there were 10,000 people amassed at the Cannonball Crossing, concerned about the injustice that was being perpetrated once again on American Indian communities. And there might have been a fear by those in power that had that so-called analysis been made public and people saw it for what it was, a gerrymandered attempt disingenuously to make it look like American Indians weren't even a part of the risk picture, that there might have been more chaos and more angst and more anger directed at those who were making the decisions to move forward than there already was. When the tribe sued and made the argument that the environmental justice analysis, like the environmental assessment, was inadequate, the court finally required that to be made public. One of the lawyers involved called that the worst gerrymandered environmental justice analysis he'd ever seen. I've never seen anything like it, and I frankly can't believe that the federal agency would accept it, let alone that the industry would proffer that as an actual evaluation of whether there would be any environmental injustice risks associated with this activity. But this story happens over and over and over again in the United States, in Canada, in all the South American countries, in New Zealand and Australia, where the minority interest in maintaining its human right to self-determine its cultural destiny is sacrificed for the profit motives of the majority society, for cheaper gas, for better returns in the stock market, and for the opportunity of the political powers that be to make decisions that place another culture or other cultures way ahead of the cultures of the indigenous peoples whose lands we all sit on and whose lands and resources we all profited from. And as climate change begins to affect all of us in more or less dramatic ways, one of the reasons why indigenous peoples are particularly concerned is because of that spiritual and ancestral connection to the land. So that if climate change means that the ecosystem that you have relied on for millennia changes dramatically so that the animals and the plants no longer can survive, that doesn't just impact you in terms of your public health and your well-being and your ability to feed yourself, but also is a risk to your culture itself. And that is a risk to your identity as an indigenous person, because those cultural connections are, in a sense, who you are, who your community is, how you're related to them.